Welcome, everyone. This is Future Sports Business Leaders. I'm Joe Favorito. For those who are new here, we created um, the group last summer based on some of the interests of some of our high school students at the School of New York Times. Uh, we started these Zoom chats 3 weeks ago with the idea of giving everybody the opportunity to hear from industry professionals in various fields. This is the third one that we're doing. We have a special guest tonight, Mike Breen. It's going to talk about a lot of things, careers, obviously media, storytelling, how he got to where he is, but also we're going to take a tremendous amount of questions from you. As I've said every week when we've done this, this is your event. It's not really ours. So how good it is what you put into it. The other thing I'll say is we're doing these every week. We're going to do one next Wednesday, actually, as opposed to Thursday because of the NFL draft. And that one I think is going to be with Mike Golub, who is now the president of the Portland Timber and the Portland Thorns of the MLS and the NWSL. Again, great opportunity for everyone to come back, no matter what your interest is, to find out how to get ahead in a field. You know, whether you want to get in broadcasting, media, sales, sponsorship. We're going to try and cover as much as we possibly can with a good group, and we're going to go for as long as we possibly can, hopefully when all this is over and maybe beyond. So once again, the group is Future Sports Business Leaders. You can follow us on Twitter. There's a website. These guys have created clubs in their high schools. I know we have a lot of college people with us tonight as well. So we hope you enjoy the next 45 minutes. So our guest tonight, as I said, is Mike Breen. Mike, I'm sure everyone here knows his background. We're not going to really kind of get into his background. You guys can look it up. We really want to get to questions. But Mike, first, thanks for joining us. And, why don't you just give us like a minute on the Mike Breen story and maybe a couple of things on that these guys would be surprised about your learning experience over your entire career.
Well, first of all, thanks, Joe. And thanks for inviting me to be able to talk to the young men and women about the future is something I love doing. I was the beneficiary of people who did it for me. My family also wants to thank you because I'm a frustrated play-by-play guy. So I've been doing play-by-play of things that my family is doing just around the house, whether it's cooking dinner or picking up after the dog. And they are so sick of that right now. So at least I get away from them for the next hour or so. So my family thanks you, and I thank you. I think this is fantastic what you guys are doing. You're already thinking about and working on your future. Like Joe said, to me, the best part about these things is the Q&A, and that's what I want to focus on because I want us to talk about what's on your minds, not what I think is on your minds. So the more questions, the better. Nothing is off limits. Whatever you want to ask, we're good to go on that. But I wanted to just throw out a couple of thoughts I jotted down earlier today about when I was in your position, whether it was in high school, thinking about where I'm going to college, whether I was in college and thinking about what I was going to do with my life and career after college. And just four things that I remember, or four things that were told to me that to me are essential. And the first one is, right now, don't stress on your career choice. I know everybody wants to say, all right, I want to do this for a living. I want to major this in college. You're going to, over the next couple of years, whether you're in high school and college, your tastes, your likes, the kind of person you are, that's going to evolve and that's going to change. So don't feel like you have to make this definitive choice that's going to take you for the rest of your life. You can change your mind. And that's going to happen to so many of you. You think you're going to go into this field, you think you're going to major in this, and you're going to change so much as a person that you're going to think, yeah, that's not right for me. And it's okay to do that. So first bit of advice, don't get stressed out in terms of where you're going to go and what your career choice is going to be. Number two, and this is one of the best pieces of advice I ever received, as you get into college and as you think about these things, get out of your comfort zone. There was a gentleman named Ed Ingles who gave me this advice because he knew I wanted to be a sportscaster. He told me, he goes, don't just do sports, do news, do music, do all sorts of different things in broadcasting, because you got to get out of your comfort zone. And when you start doing other things, not only do you become versatile, but when you're doing things that, or you say your weakness, you're going to be stronger at your strength. It's like an NBA player who's a great shooter, who, is lights out, as good a shooter is in the NBA, but he can't ball handle for anything. So what does he do? All he does is he works on his weakness. And by working on that weakness, you add to your strengths, in fact, make your strength even stronger. So get out of your comfort zone. The third thing, don't be afraid. You probably heard this a lot, but don't be afraid to fail. We all fail. You're, with perhaps a few exceptions, you're all going to fail as you get out of college, as you're in college. These things are going to happen. Nobody is perfect. I have failed so much in my career. I've lost jobs. I've applied for so many jobs and didn't get them. Perhaps my biggest failure, one time on the air, I mispronounced my own name. So there are things that you're going to do that you can't believe that there's going to be failure involved. But don't worry about it. It's all part of growth. And you're going to look back at it someday and you're going to say, boy, oh boy, it did make me better. It made me stronger. And the last thing, and for me, this is the thing that I think is the most important of all. Be the person that everyone enjoys working with. People skills are more important than anything else you're going to learn in college, anything else you're going to do in terms of technique and talent. Being somebody who gets along with other people is going to be the number one factor, in my opinion, of getting success. So be the person that everyone wants to work with because of your attitude, because of the type of person you are. I know I sound parental when I'm saying this, but trust me, this is the most important thing. Now, all four of those things, if you want to talk to a little bit more, if you want me to be more specific, I'll be glad to. But I just want to throw a couple of those things out to get started.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So we're going to control the questions. Matthew has some in queue already. He'll call on you. As he calls on you, a couple things. Tell us who you are and where you're from. A couple of other things we're not going to cover. We want to get to as many questions as we can. So don't ask Mike about the NBA season when it's coming back. We don't know. He doesn't know. It would be a waste of time to kind of try to get into that because we're not going to be able to. So let's keep it on things like careers, storytelling, best advice, all the things you'd really like to know from Mike Breen. So Matthew, why don't you get us started?
So first we're going to go to Huckleberry Jones. I think he's the first question.
Hey, Mike. I'm Huckleberry Jones. I'm from Los Angeles, California. You probably don't remember me, but I shadowed under Howie Singer for 2 games for MSG Network. So I've sat in production meetings with you before, but I just want to know, because I was on Howie's side, the director side, but I want to know what goes through your head and your preparation in those production meetings as well.
Yeah, well, Huckle, very nice to see you again. By the way, Howie tested positive and was in the hospital for
I know.
But he's doing really well. I spoke to him
Yeah.
today, doing great. So good news
Yeah.
concerning Howie. When you get together, the beauty of what I do in terms of the actual job is I fell in love with basketball because it's a team sport, and there's nothing better than watching 5 players on a court play together, sacrifice individual things for the sake of the team. Well, it's the same thing in broadcasting. There are probably about 30 to 35 people per game on the TV crew. That includes announcers, that includes production staff, that includes technical staff. And the most important thing when you do a production meeting is you discuss about that game tonight. What are you thinking about? What are the top storylines tonight? And you have to talk to the producer and director because, the director, he needs to know where you're going. What are the type of things you're going to talk about so he can inform his camera people to keep a close eye on that. Say, for example, we're doing a Knick game. We're really going to focus on RJ Barrett. So I tell the director, hey, listen, I've got a bunch of RJ Barrett stories. We really want to focus on improving as a rookie. So he might tell one of his camera people, hey, just ISO on RJ Barrett all game long because we're really going to focus on it. So those are the type of things that you do there to make sure that you're all on the same page. And that's important throughout the entire telecast. It really is, you hear the announcers, those are the ones you hear, but it's everybody that's involved that's a team aspect. And that's the type of thing we do in a production meeting to make sure that that we're all on the same page going in.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think the next question is from Charlie Novak. Yeah.
Hi, Mike. My name is Charlie Novak. I'm a senior from New York City, and I attend Ithaca College. We talk so much about preparation for a big game, and you've called the last 3 Game 7s of the NBA Finals. And do you prepare more specifically for a Game 7 like you would for a Game 6 or a Game 1? And of the last 3 Game 7s, which Game 7 required more preparation? Was it the Celtics-Lakers, Cleveland-Golden State, or Miami-San Antonio?
Well, Charlie, the preparation for those games change from a standpoint of this. First off, when you're doing a regular season, normally your preparation is about a team and how they're doing all season. When you get into a playoff series, most of the preparation focuses on that particular matchup. What happened in the previous 5 games, if it's game 6, or what happened in the previous 6 games, if there's game 7. And that's where you really focus on, because all the other stuff, the previous rounds, the regular season, most of it is meaningless when you get to that point. The difference, though, in a game 7 is you now have to put it into historical perspective as the game goes on. It's actually not just a game 7. Anytime it's an elimination game. So say, game 6, somebody's going to possibly win a championship because it's going to be 3-2 going into that. So you have to prepare the same way in game 6 as you would in game 7 in case somebody wins the title that night. And the only difference in the preparation is that you look at, okay, if this team wins, what does that mean? Where's the historical context? Or if the other team loses and they had a chance to win a championship, what does that mean for their franchise going farther? So a lot of it is just big picture context. And when it's an elimination game, you want to, at the end of the game, you don't want to rehearse what you're going to say, but you want to have an idea of what's the most appropriate phrase. Like, what does this championship mean to that team or to that city or to a particular player? For example, when LeBron James won his first championship, I wanted to think about, okay, what does it mean for him? And should I have him in my wrap up as they're winning the title? Same thing when they won in Cleveland. That meant so much to the city. So it was important to put the historical context for the city and not just for the team. So that's what you have to do differently in an elimination game that's for a championship, is to make sure that you have the big picture and put into historical context what it means.
Great. Our next question is from Daniel Coates.
Hi, Mike. My name is Daniel Coates. I'm from Situate, Massachusetts. I'm a rising senior at Boston College. And obviously, these are crazy times. I think a lot of people in this group are interested in going into sportscasting or media. I was just wondering, it's kind of a 2-part question. For aspiring sportscasters now, what would you recommend we do to kind of mold our craft or improve in play-by-play or in some way our sportscasting skills? And also, what does a first step for a sportscaster or someone who wants to go into the play-by-play industry right out of college or right out when you're 22, 23 years old?
All right, Daniel. The first thing, I don't think it's really changed over the years in terms of what you need to do. I was talking before we came on the conference when it started. I majored in communication, but if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have minored in communication and majored in English, because I think for me, the one thing I had to get better at and still work on is the English language, vocabulary, grammar. I know it sounds boring, but if you can speak the language, and even when you're a broadcaster, you have to write quite a bit, because there are teases, there are intros that you have to write, and improving your vocabulary. All those things to me are essential when you go into broadcasting, and I don't think that's ever changed. In terms of play-by-play, the key is when you first get out, and even when you're doing it, is to get on the air. Repetition is just, it's essential. And even if that means you get out of college and you don't get your first job for a while. And by the way, I graduated in May. Like most, May in 1983. I didn't get my first job until October. So for those of you, when you're thinking about getting out, don't panic if you don't get that first job right away. It takes time. It really does take time. But when you first start, you just need to get on the air. And that's part of the get out of your comfort zone, because most of the time when you get out, you're not going to get a sportscasting job right away. You might get a job where you do sports updates, but you often have to do news updates. You might get a job where you're the afternoon DJ who does the news updates as well. So the key is just to get on the air, because as talented as you might be, you need to get repetitions. And even if that means if you don't have a job and you want to do play-by-play, sitting in front of your television and calling the game off the TV, you might feel silly doing it, but it's going to get you better. I just remember the first time I called a game, I was so bad in the first half of the game And by the second half, I just felt more comfortable. And then the second game, I was a little better and a little better and a little better. So like anything in life, the more you do it, the more practice have it, the more repetition, you're going to get better. Did that answer your question, Daniel?
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much.
Great. And our next question is from Joe Cirallo.
Yeah, hey Mike. My name is Joe Cirallo. I'm a senior at St. Bonaventure right now who's graduating shortly. And I was wondering, given the current environment and climate, what would your advice be for seniors who are graduating into a world with no sports that are looking for broadcasting gigs?
Yeah, Joe, obviously the timing isn't great, but don't sweat it out. It's going to return. Sports are going to return. And you'll get the opportunity. I think do the same things that you intended on doing. You know, you send out resumes, you let them know, you make sure when you talk to people that you say, listen, I understand it's a difficult time and I know nothing's going on right now. You're not hiring, you're not playing, but just so you know down the future, you have my name, I'll follow up down the road, stuff like that. Don't let that affect you. Again, it might take a little longer than normal because we don't know when we're going to get back, but you have to stick with that. What I would say to any senior going in, when you're sending out a tape or a resume, okay, so most places, they get tons of tapes and resumes for a job that's open. So the key is, how do you separate yourself from all the people? Say, for example, when I was at NBC Radio, I had to hire a reporter. I got like 50 or 60 tapes that I had to go through, and I didn't really have time to go through 50 or 60 tapes. Now, obviously, the tape has to be good or the resume has to be good, but I think you have to really think about how do you separate yourself from the pack. And what I always did was I always tried to get an in-person meeting. So if I applied for a job that was out there and I sent in a tape, I would follow it up with a phone call, find out the person who was in charge of hiring and ask them if I could come in and pick their brain. So that way I would somehow get into their office and I wasn't just a piece of paper like on a resume, or I wasn't a tape that they were going to listen to. I was a face in front of them, and you can make an impression that way. It's a lot of legwork, and in many cases it's a lot of legwork and extra time that's not going to lead to anything. But I think it helped me separate myself from people who just sent in their tapes and resumes. And I think that's important, to try and make contact. And to get in, use personal contact, any kind of contact that you have with anybody in the industry. You might think, oh, I'm a senior in college, I don't know anybody in the business that, I have no contacts. You probably have more contacts than you think. It could be, the guy at the laundromat has a brother-in-law, the guy who's, laundromat in your town has a brother-in-law who works at ESPN. Well, that's a contact. I mean, you don't know them directly, but don't be afraid to use those contacts to try and get in the door somewhere. And even if it's not in the door for a job, it's in the door to meet somebody and ask them questions. I went on, and this is a little long-winded, but I think this is important. When I got out of college, I must have gone on 30 to 40 what I would call informational interviews. They weren't for a job, but I tried to get a hold of people in the industry and ask them if I could come in, sit down with them and pick their brain and get some advice from them. So most people like that will say, sure, I'll be glad to talk to you, because you're not threatening, you're not coming in begging or asking for a job. You're just asking for advice. And most people in the business are good like that. So what I did was I made a contact. I went in, I talked to the person, tried to impress them, and got information from them. And that information helped me in my search for a job. But more importantly, now I have a connection with somebody at a radio station or at a newspaper, and it really helped build my contact level. So try and be creative in terms of thinking of different ways where you can separate yourself when it's time to apply for a job from all the other candidates.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you.
Great. Next question is coming from Trenton Upchurch.
Howdy, Mike. I'm Trent Upchurch from Lexington, representing the University of Kentucky. I know you got your start in broadcast radio. What sort of connections did you make that ended up leading to you getting up and the call up to do play-by-play for the MSG?
All right, Trent. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. My first job, as I mentioned, I graduated in May. I didn't get my first job until October. And the only reason I got the job, the girl I was dating at the time, her mother happened to have lunch with one of her best friends. And over lunch, her mother found out from her best friend that her son was a little stressed out. And she said, well, why is your son stressed out? Well, he's stressed out because his news reporter quit on him today, and he needs a news reporter quickly. So she calls me immediately. She and tells me about this opening, and I rush up to Poughkeepsie, New York, from my home in Yonkers, New York, and interviewed for the job. And the guy was so desperate, he hired me right away. So that was my connection. And I will say this to you, Trent: almost every single job I had, in fact, every single job, came from somebody that either recommended me or somebody to help me get through the door. And again, you have to work on cultivating contacts in anybody and find out who knows anybody in the business. But that's how you have to do. You have to reach out and talk to as many people, and not in a threatening manner, where you say, hey, you got to help me get a job. I always use the phrase, can you give me some advice on how to get a job? And that's a way to impress people. And in the few times that I've been in charge of hiring people, and it wasn't very often, I would interview a lot of people. I would talk to people who were looking for a job. And I would say maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 impressed me to the point where I'd say, you know what, if something becomes open, I'm going to call that young man or that young woman back, because they really impressed me the way they handle themselves. You can really impress somebody, and you might not get a job that day, but you might get a job 6 months from now when an opening comes about. So that all goes back to the people skills and being able to deal with people and interact with people as important as anything else. So that's the kind of connection that I had to get started. And from that job, I started meeting other people, and then I added to my contact list. But that first job just happened to be, luck of the draw. And that's what happens very, very often. Everybody in the business has a crazy story like that.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Great. Now we're going to Matt Sotile.
How's it going, Mike? Matt Satilli, senior at Boston College. Just a curious question. I saw you did play-by-play for NBA Live for a number of years. What is that like, doing play-by-play for a video game? What was that process like?
It was brutal, Matt. It was awful. Actually, it's an awful experience. The people I worked with were fantastic, but it was an awful experience. You sit in a studio for, it was like 5 or 6 days of 8 to 10 hours per day, and you have to lay down tracks for every possibility that's going to happen. So one day I spent hours going through every single NBA team and saying, and the Hawks go up by 9, and the Hawks go up by 10, and the Hawks go up by 11. And I do it from 1 to like 25. Then you go to the next team in the alphabet, the Boston Celtics, and the Boston Celtics go up by 1. And it was the most painful thing. And you lose your voice after a couple of days. Now, when the end product comes out, it's fun. But that was one of the most painful experiences I've ever had. Not fun at all.
Great. Thank you.
Matt, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Just said great.
Thank
you.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry. Next we're going to Jack Benjamin.
Hey, Mike, how's it going? Jack Benjamin. I'm from Armonk, New York, so not too far away from where you grew up in Yonkers. I think might be one of the few here who was actually out of college. I'm 24. I work as the play-by-play voice of the Nichols State Colonels down in Louisiana. I'm back home right now, but I'm curious. You've got one of the great calls, of course, in sports history with the bang call. It's unique. I know there's a lot of different guys who have catchphrases, but sort of curious how that came about. And if you could just talk us through maybe calling some of the big moments. I know someone asked about calling Game 7s, but take us through, what's going through your mind when Curry hits, a 40-footer for the win, or Ray Allen's three-pointer to tie Game 6, things like that.
Well, the bang call came from when I was a student at Fordham. There was about 10 of us that we would rotate doing the games. And so while 2 guys were doing the games, the other 8 of us would go and sit in the stands, whether it was home and away, and we, cheer on our college team. And when a Fordham player hit a big shot when I was in the stands, I would yell out bang. And, it just was my way of celebrating my team. And I tried it on the air actually a few times when I was doing college radio at Fordham. And I didn't really like the way it sounded, so I kind of shelved it. But then when I started doing television, there were a couple of games where there was a really big shot at the end, and the crowd would go crazy, and the crowd noise would really go high. And it's hard for a broadcaster when the crowd is crazy to elevate his voice above the crowd. Now, there are some that have voices that cut through anything. I don't have that type of voice. So I needed a really concise, quick call to have, a dramatic call for a big game or for a big play, and then get out of the way and let the crowd come in. Well, bang is obviously a one-syllable word. I used it a couple of times, and I liked the way it was in a big moment because it allowed me to make the dramatic call, but then get out of the way and let the crowd noise and everything take over. So that's how it started. As for the pressure of doing a game 7 of a finals, that's just a matter of going through it. I will tell you, almost every event that you do, the first time you do it, it can be terrible. The first NBA game I called, I was so nervous. I know I was awful. The first playoff game, I knew I was awful. The first time I did a playoff game where it was close down the wire and it was an exciting game, you hyperventilate and you go through it. And, you get a little crazy and you don't do a great job, but you get through it and you learn from it. And the thing that I learned the most was that if you really prepare and you have nothing else to worry about but calling what's in front of you, then you'll be able to do it. So you just focus on the game. And if you love the sport you're calling, you're going to put in the appropriate enthusiasm and passion for it. But I think the key thing to getting over nerves, there are 2 things. Number one, you just have to go through it because you're going to be nervous. I still get nervous before finals games. Every finals game I get nervous. But if I'm confident that I've prepared the best I possibly can, and I have nothing to worry about just calling the game, because I've now done it for so many years, you overcome those nerves and you feel good because you know you've prepared as best you possibly can.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Great. Now we're going to Matt Price.
Hi, Mike. How are you? I'm Matt Price, and I am from Rockland County, New York. I live in the town New City, so just north of New York City. And like my friend Charlie before, I'm also a senior at Ithaca College. So one of my dreams, as well as many other people probably in the chat, is to go into play-by-play like you. And I understand that we have to be subjective every single time, no matter what station we work for. But there could be times where we might have subjectivity aside. For instance, one of the games that you called in the past was the Malice at the Palace between the Pacers and the Pistons. And there were people like the color commentator you work with. I can't remember what his name was. Bill Walton. Thank you. I knew it was Bill something. Bill Walton. There was even the late John Saunders, who was calling out the fans that night. So what advice would you give to aspiring sportscasters or play-by-play people like me and a bunch of people in the chat, where we might have to put subjectivity aside in case something like that happens, or any kind of weird behavior happens from not just the players but the fans as well?
Right. That's a good question. And what helped me that night was that was a national broadcast on ESPN. I had done quite a number of Knick games, and the Knicks during that time seemed to get in fights like once every other week. So I had actually had some experience in calling fights in basketball games. And again, repetition, so it helped. But what I learned by doing those is when it happens, again, as the play-by-play job, you have to document what you see in front of you. So when it initially happens, when the whole thing is going on, you don't get into offering your opinion about who's right and who's wrong. When it's happening in front of you, just document it. It's like you're doing play-by-play of a game. You're just doing the play-by-play of a fight. And you keep going through that until it ends. Once that ends and it's over, then you think about putting it in perspective in terms of what this means, who is right, who's at fault, who's going to pay the price for this. Then you get into, the emotion of it and feeling. What that particular night, what we were proud of as a crew was that, we stated what happened. Once it settled down, we gave our feelings on what it meant to be there and seeing it in person. And then when we threw it back to the studio people were like really harsh and were criticized because they felt that they went overboard in terms of their emotion. They let their emotions get away from them. But I think it's important when you do a moment like that. And that's the same thing at the end of a game 7. You just, you're emotional, you're fired up, but you have to try and keep that in check and just document what you see in front of you. Be the reporter on the scene. And then when it's all said and done, when the whole thing is over, then you give your opinions on what you think was the reason and all the other various intangibles from the whole thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Now we have Michael Buetti.
Hey, Mike. I'm Michael Buetti. I'm a freshman at Ithaca College from Mount Kisco, New York. And my question is, you obviously started like from the bottom. Now you're announcing play-by-play for ESPN. What is the biggest piece of advice you could give to us? It doesn't necessarily have to be like play-by-play. It could be like behind the scenes stuff, like either producing or something like that. What is the biggest piece of advice you could give to us to help us continuously progress in the industry?
Yep, Michael, some of the things I said at the top, I think are really important. And that's when you first get out of college, to get that first job and to get on the air is vital. And it doesn't matter what you do. If you're doing news reporting, if you're disc jockeying, anything that you can do to get on the air, because that's, you might be the most spectacular broadcaster in all of every college and university in the country, but you still have to grow before you, in most cases, before you start getting those jobs. But when you get that first one, it doesn't matter what you do. In fact, it does help to get out of your comfort zone and do it. So that's number one. And it's the type of thing where versatility will help you as well. Again, my first job, I was doing news and I was doing some sports as well. My first job was I was a news reporter, and I was a news reporter for a radio station. And part of my job was going to things like covering the Poughkeepsie zoning board meeting. You have not been bored in your life until you cover a Poughkeepsie zoning board meeting. But what happened was I knew nothing about it, and I was forced to ask many questions about it. And not only ask questions, but learn about it. What's the key to the story? And then to try to make the story interesting in the report that I was doing. And that was a real challenge for me because I knew nothing about it. Now, if I was going and covering a Super Bowl, I would know what questions to ask. I would know what would be the key things, and it would be an easy thing to do. But this was a challenge. And what it did was it made me better in terms of my sportscasting, but it taught me how to ask questions to get the right kind of answers. It taught me how to write about something and make it interesting, even though I had no idea and felt it wasn't interesting at all. So those are the type of things I think early, because it's not going to be easy to get that first job. And I think that when you show that you're willing to do anything, that's going to help you get that initial job. And most importantly, getting on the air where you're getting repetitions. I'll tell you one quick story. When I got out of college, I gave myself 5 years that if I was satisfied with the progress of my dream of being a sportscaster, then I would continue. But if I wasn't satisfied, if I was going nowhere, I was going to give it up and become a steam fitter in the construction business with my dad. So after about 2.5 years, I was still at that Poughkeepsie radio station, and I was doing a lot of things, but I was not making any money. It was hard to pay the rent. I was applying for other jobs, and I was getting rejected on all of them. And in many of them, I never even heard back. So I got really discouraged after about 2.5 years. And I called my father, and I said to him, send me the application for the Steam Fitters Union. I don't think I can do this anymore. And he said, okay. He said, but don't forget, you said you were going to give it 5 years, and you're just halfway there. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? I did give myself 5 years, and I stayed with it. And within the next 6 months, I got my first big break, which was being a producer / reporter for NBC Radio in New York. But I was close to giving it up. I was really disillusioned. And the reason I tell you guys and gals this story is because many of you are going to hit that roadblock where you're not getting the progress that you would hope for. You're not sometimes even getting that first job. Don't be discouraged. It takes everybody different times. Now, for some, it might never happen. But if you don't give yourself the proper amount of time to get it into this business, then it's not going to happen. And I will tell you this, all the difficult times, all the stressful times, all the worrying, it's all worth it once you get in it, if it's something that you really love and really want to do. And, for me, I knew if I was a sportscaster, I would be happy going to work every day of my life. And that's been the case. But it was some painful times to get there. So expect that. It all goes back to, don't be afraid of failure. If it's something that you really, really desire to do, if it's something you're passionate about, you're going to fight through those tough times in order to get there.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great. Now we're going to Christopher Matthias.
Hey, Mike. My name's Christopher Matias. I'm from Queens, New York. I'm a grad student at St. John's University. And I just wanted to know, did you feel like there were any real differences or difficulties when you shifted from mixed radio to on-air television play-by-play? And if so, what were they?
You know what, Christopher? I always felt that it's harder to do radio than television from a standpoint of just announcing the game. Because in radio, you have to talk about everything. In TV, you're almost like the punctuation of what's going on. But the hardest thing to go in that transition is in radio, you're talking every single thing. You're describing where the ball is. You're describing who's passing, everything. In TV, you have to pull back and you can't talk as much. And the first few times that I did television, I talked so much, I'm sure the audience was like, oh, well, this guy, please, will he just shut up already? Because I was used to doing radio. But you learn and you have people who help you and teach you. And I had a great producer, the aforementioned Howie Singer, who somebody spoke about earlier. I think Huckleberry talked about him. He was a great producer in that he would tell me, hey, back off a little bit. And that's all part of that teamwork. He's a director now, but he was a producer back then. So you need that. So that was important. The other thing is when you're doing TV, you're constantly having somebody talking to you in your ear while you're talking. And that takes a while to get used to, like anything, because you'll be talking and they'll be saying something in your ear and you're hesitant to talk, and you also feel like you want to respond. I've worked with a lot of color analysts where they're talking on the air and the producer will say something to them and they'll on the other go, what was that? Because they're just not used to it. And Bill Walton, who I worked with one time, we happened to work with a very chatty producer years ago. And at the first time out, he picks up his headphones and he slams them on the table. And he looks at me and he says, you better tell him to stop talking in my ear because I can't even think while I'm trying to talk. So there's some different things that you have to get used to. But if you can handle radio play-by-play, you can handle TV play-by-play, because I think radio play-by-play is more difficult.
Thanks for the insight, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to Quinlan.
Hey, Mike. Quinlan Kelly, senior from Boston College. Like most of us here, I've been watching some of the old broadcasts of the NBA on NBA TV and some of the ones that have been put on ESPN. And my question has been, what's the differences in the challenges when you approach a game where a team is like the 2003 Pistons, where they want to slow it down and play a bunch of defense, versus, say, the Warriors from the past couple of years, where they can go off for 130 points a night?
Yeah, Quinlan, there's really no difference when you're doing TV play-by-play, but when you're doing radio, that's different, because when you're doing radio play-by-play of a team that runs up and down the floor, whether it's the Warriors or whether it was the Phoenix Suns when Steve Nash was there, that's hard, and you have to learn to be concise. I think being concise, I can't stress that enough for anybody who's doing play-by-play. We all tend to overtalk a little bit. And I think in radio, especially, is when you have an up-tempo team and the ball's going up and down the floor and you have to try and stick with it and keep pace with that, you've got to learn to be concise. You have to learn to use less words to describe what's going on. Otherwise, you're going to be behind the ball the whole time. TV, it's not. You just, the viewer can see it, and you get comfortable with, just, again, when you need to talk, you talk. When the analyst is talking, you lay off with him. But that's a key thing on those things, I would say. When you're doing a complete different tempo like that, conciseness it's essential. And, you bring up a thing that just a reminder to say, I think one of the things that really helped me was I picked very early in my career, 3 people who I would ask to frequently critique my games. Now, I would watch my games and I'd be my harshest critic, but you need to hear from other people as well. But importantly, you need to hear from people who are going to tell you the truth. And you'll find that most people won't do that. You know, your parents are going to say, "Oh, son, you did such a wonderful job. You were great, even if you had a horrible game." So you have to find people who are going to tell you the truth. And I was very fortunate that I had 3 good friends that would tell me if I was bad, and things like that. So I think it's important to get somebody who's in the business who can tell you. I think it's important to get somebody who might be just a fan that watches at home, but somebody who's going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And it can be hard. And there were a couple of times I got mad when they told me I wasn't doing the job that I should have been doing, or telling me things I had to do better, but it made me a better broadcaster.
Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Right, next is Kyle.
Hi, Mike. My name's Kyle Reams. I am a junior in high school at Harvard Westlake in Los Angeles. And I actually do announce the games for us there on a live stream. And you have obviously been on the audio and I guess video end, but you've called a lot of very iconic moments in the NBA. Have you ever been like watching highlights or watching anything and you hear your voice, and what's that experience kind of like, just when there's something that's so famous and in the NBA, like the Ray Allen game winner or something like that, and it's you who's the one calling it?
Well, I think, Kyle, a lot of broadcasters, and I seem to have lost my lighting. I'll try and get that back.
Looks better that way.
Mood lighting.
I think most broadcasters don't like watching their own voice, watching their own games, and listening to their own voice. It takes getting used to. It's a necessary evil. So I do like, and I still do once or twice a year. I'll watch a game just to see if I have the appropriate energy, if I'm getting my analyst in as much as I should, things like that. Watching the games now, like some of these big games, I do watch once in a while, and it can be helpful because maybe something I did back then that for some reason I stopped doing. Maybe I got a little lazy on a certain area. That will help me say, you know what, I used to do this and I like the way that sounded. And maybe I need to do it again. I think that's always helpful if you can get something beneficial out of it. But I do, when I watch, I realize how blessed I am and how fortunate I've been. I really do think, and it sounds corny and cliché-ish, but it's really an honor to be able to call those games, and I take it as a responsibility. And it reminds me of the fact that you know, it's an important job for the people who love the sport. And I've taken it as a responsibility to make sure that I'm prepared every time I go on the air, that I have the necessary energy and passion when I go on the air, because that's what people deserve on big games like that. But it is, quite honestly, it's pretty cool sometimes to watch. We actually, my son and daughter and I watched the Ray Allen game the other night. And I tell you what, I came away from watching that game, how good Jeff Van Gundy was that night. I thought that was one of the great performances by an analyst in a big game I've ever heard. He was brilliant that night.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Now we have Josh.
Hi, Mike. I was wondering how you feel your preparation for a game differs when you're doing games for MSG versus ESPN and ABC.
You know, Josh, that's a good question too, because there is a difference. When you do a national game for ESPN, you're not only broadcasting, say it's the Knicks and the Pacers. You're not only broadcasting for Knicks fans watching, you're broadcasting for Pacer fans watching. And just as importantly, you're broadcasting for just NBA fans who don't have any kind of ties to those teams or loyalty to those teams. So from that standpoint, you've got to make sure that you go with all of those people and service what they want out of the broadcast. So, you know, I'll give 50% of my comments about the Pacers, 50% of my comments about the Knicks. I'll talk how great the Pacers are playing or how great the Knicks are playing, or, you know, just to make sure it's even and each team gets that's equal time on the air. But when I'm doing a Knicks game for MSG, that's the network for majority of the people that are watching are Knicks fans. So instead of me talking about, why the Pacers are up by 20, I will get into that. More of the time I'll talk about, well, if the Knicks are down by 20, why are the Knicks down by 20? I'm not going to focus as much about Indiana. It's hard to put a percentage on it, but I would say 75% of the times or things I talk about will be Knicks centered as opposed to Pacer centered. You never ignore the other team, and it's an important part of the story, but you look more from a Knick angle when you're doing a local team than you would for a national telecast, and you just have to balance it a little bit more.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Now we're going to go to Jeremy Goldstein.
Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm from Chappaqua, New York. I'm a rising sophomore at Ithaca College. So as someone who's already started to try to dabble into the internship process and someone who's sort of, again, entering it for the first time, what's some advice you can give me in regards to making a good impression that is unique to other applicants that are applying to the same company or media industry?
Right, Jeremy, internships are so important. I mentioned this gentleman, Ed Ingles at WCBS. I interned under him, and I learned more from him in that semester that I worked with him than I learned in 4 years of classes at Fordham. And we were friends. We became lifetime friends. Unfortunately, he passed away a month ago, but he was my mentor until the day he died. And the lessons I learned from him during that semester were vital. So what I would say to you is, when you get an internship, because there were other people too that at WCBS I learned from, try and just introduce yourself to as many people as possible. Ask as many questions as possible without being, overly bearing in terms of, and just sit back and really, really pay attention to how they go about their business. I was just so lucky because I was able to shadow him and watch just the way he did everything from writing to broadcasting to dealing with people. It was terrific, and you can do that. And it's important to ask as many questions as possible, and just let people know that you're interested in learning. And again, anybody in the business is gonna I shouldn't say anybody, but most will be gracious with their time and glad to share their advice in terms of what they think. And this goes back to the get out of your comfort zone. Ask people in other aspects. Say you work at a radio station or you work at a TV station. Ask all different types of people, all different types of questions. Really take advantage of that by getting to know as many people as possible. And quite honestly, that are, people you can use for contacts down the road. If you can do more than one internship, I couldn't recommend that any higher. There are two types of internships. Some are where you just sit back and watch. There's nothing hands-on. But those can be powerful because you'll learn from people and make contacts. Other internships at, say, smaller radio stations or TV stations, sometimes they let you do writing or different things like that. Those are great too because you get hands-on experience. So the more internships you can do, the better. Some schools have a limit on it, some don't. But I think they're so valuable. And the number one reason is you're going to make a lot of contacts if you go out of your way to make sure you meet people.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Great. Now we have Lorenzo.
I notice a lot of you have your quarantine facial hair going. Nobody's shaving these days, even me.
They're all hockey fans, maybe that's what.
Okay, that could be it.
All right, Mike, in my defense, I left my razor at my college, and my college didn't let me back on campus. So this is
You can go buy another one. Don't worry about it. We'll
okay, want to go with that? That's good.
All right, I'm Lorenzo DeScala from Flemington, New Jersey. I'm also representing Ithaca College. I just wanted to ask about your time covering Jeremy Lin and the rise of Lin's sanity. A player who went from the end of the bench to hitting game-winning shots and the biggest name in sports in what was a matter of days.
Well, Jeremy, my favorite games sometimes are the ones where the underdog comes out of nowhere and does something, and that's the ultimate story. I've been really blessed to call big games, finals games, Game 7, Olympic gold medal games. The most fun I've ever had doing play-by-play was with the 3 weeks of Linsanity. I've never had more fun because it was something that was so unexpected. This young man who was basically a G League player, wasn't getting any time, became the most famous athlete in the world for 3 weeks. And it wasn't for any kind of, gimmick thing that he did. He was spectacular for 3 weeks. And he took a team that was struggling and brought them, they won their first 7 games of the Linsanity. And I would never say this about NBA players, but his teammates were giddy every single night when he was doing things. I would watch the bench, and I'd never seen a bench react when he would make another big play. And it was just the crowd that reacted to him. It was unbelievable how much fun it was. And I've never, one of the big games was in Toronto. And when he was announced in the starting lineups, it was the loudest cheer I've ever heard for a player on an opposing team. More than any time Kobe Bryant played on the road, more than any time LeBron James played on the road. And when he hit the game-winning shot near the end, and they weren't Knicks fans in that game. They were Raptors fans. And the cheer for him when that shot went in, I've never heard a road crowd or a crowd applaud and cheer for a road player, for a visiting player than I saw from them. It was truly amazing. And it didn't last. He got hurt, and then he left and went to the Houston Rockets. But it was really a special, special time.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike.
My pleasure.
Great. Now we have Jake Burris.
Hey, Mike. My name's Jake Burris. I'm a junior at Furman University. And my question is, what kind of information do you get during the game? So obviously, you have a lot of experience, in the NBA, but you got to have some kind of information that people are giving you. Do you have stat sheets in front of you, or people, handing you notes? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Jake, and that's really changed since when I first started. But quite honestly, in terms of having things at your fingertips, NBA basketball, it's really easy from that standpoint because you have stat monitors in front of you, and they have every possible stat that's going on to the game, and it's just updated and updated and updated. So it's right there at your fingertips. Then you have a statistician. And if you have a good one, and I have a great one, a gentleman by the name of Dave Freed, who does most of the games that I work, it just enhances the stats that are going on during the games. Plus you have a producer who's in your ear. He's looking at numbers. He's looking at stats. We have a graphics guy in the truck as well. The graphics producer also, he's always looking at stats. So you have 4 or 5 different people that are very helpful in terms of giving you numbers that are relevant to what's going out on the floor. And you even have, social media now. I don't check during the game, but between quarters and stuff, I'll check because so many things can happen that you don't even see, or something that's going on in another game in the league that could be pertinent to what you're doing in your game. There's so many things at your disposal with numbers and stats. And if you need something on a storyline, it's really helpful. I will say this, though. And a big part of the job is being balanced between putting out numbers and just throwing out a ton of numbers that it just becomes white noise. So you have to balance between appropriate stats, but at the same time, let the actual game action and what the players are doing and their body language, et cetera, do that as much as do as the numbers. And, you'll notice if you watch a game and the announcer's giving stat after stat after stat, it almost becomes like, all right, enough already. You can get too much stats because there's so much. You have to know when to stop, when to shut it off, because it can get overwhelming.
Appreciate it.
Mike, we've got time for a couple more, I think, right, Matthew?
Sure.
Yeah, I think we have 2 more left. Clay Thomas is next.
Hi, Mike. I'm Clay. I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm a sophomore also at Ithaca College. Every night, I guess you have to have a different preparation for it, but what are the biggest aspects of your own preparation? Like, what are the most important things for you, and what's the process like for you for each night?
All right, Clay, good question. By the way, a lot of Ithaca College people, my best friend from high school went to Ithaca College. I spent a lot of weekends up at Ithaca College. Some I'm not proud of. It was a place to go visit. Anyway, You know what, Clay? It starts with, there's so many things to read on the internet now. It's, again, so different. It used to be when you'd go into a city to do a game on the road, the first thing you do is you'd get the local newspaper, because that's the only place you'd get some extra information. There was no internet when I started doing NBA basketball. Now, I could read 5 hours a day per game on the game that I'm doing. So you read the articles that are important, that have something to do, that you gotta try and incorporate. But more importantly, when you read all that stuff and you get your information, and then you go online and you read the game notes, which has all different statistical information of how the players and the teams have been doing, you gather all that stuff, and it's important, and you're going to use probably a decent amount of it. But you use that information to go and talk to people when you get to the arena. So I would say 75% of the information that I've gathered during the day is from once I get to the arena, talking to players, coaches, other broadcasters, sometimes referees. That's the stuff that's up to date. I use the information that I gathered earlier in the day to help me with my questions, to advance what I've learned, to get a more current update on what's going on. And I think that's all back to people skills. If you can develop relationships with players and coaches and other members of the media, that's where you get your information. So once I get to the arena, that's where the work begins in terms of, trying to talk to people and gather a lot of that kind of stuff. Most of the stuff, though, that you get, or I shouldn't say most, but a lot of it you never use in the game, but you have to have it there just in case. I can't tell you how many times that it's happened where a guy that you never expect to play, the third string point guard, like a Jeremy Lin thing, where you're not going to expect him to play, but the starting point guard sprains his ankle, okay? Then the second point guard, the backup, gets in foul trouble. Now all of a sudden, this guy's playing 35 minutes, a guy that hasn't played 35 minutes all season. So that's where the preparation comes, in terms of, you need to have something on every single player who's on the roster, who's eligible to play that night, in case that player has the game of their life. That's the way I look at it, because you never know. If you don't have anything on that last guy, nothing. You just know his height, weight, and where he went to school. And all of a sudden, he's thrust into a role that night that didn't expect and has the game of his life, but then you failed in your preparation. So the preparation is to make sure you have something on everybody who's going to be, at least has a chance to participate in the game that night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think our last question is from Noah Schwartz.
Hi, Mike. I was just wondering about catchphrases. I know somebody asked about the bang catchphrase earlier. Do you think it's necessary for every person who's on air in sports to have one, or do you think it should be a case-by-case basis depending on the person and what their style is?
You know what, Noah, I would say this. I think it's, if you find a good one that's comfortable for you and you like it and it works, it's a great thing to have. But the worst thing is the catchphrase that's forced. And if you're just doing it to get a signature call because you want a signature call, I don't think it works. But you'll know yourself. When you start calling games, there'll be a certain situation that, it's just something that a phrase or a word fits perfectly. Like I said earlier, when I first started using bang, I didn't like it. And it wasn't until later that I felt comfortable. I would also say that don't worry about a catchphrase early. I didn't use it until I was a little more established in my career, because what you want to do is you want to build that foundation. You want to be a really good technical play-by-play guy first. And then you start to branch out. Then you start to use catchphrases. Then you start to show your personality a little bit more. It's almost like I liken it to building a house. You build that concrete foundation underneath first. Then you build the actual house. Then once the house is good, then you put an addition on the side. Then you put the pool in the backyard. Slowly but surely you add to it. But the first thing you need to do when you start going is to build that strong foundation where you gain the respect of your listeners or your viewers, that they say, okay, he knows what he's doing. This is a good play-by-play guy. Then you start adding the personality aspect, the catchphrases or a little bit of fun into the broadcast. That's my way of doing it. Others will disagree. Others will say, to get noticed, you need that catchphrase right away. That's not the way I would do it. I would do it, make yourself a really good technical play-by-play guy first, and then you add that, kind of the extra stuff.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Very well.
Mike, before we let you go, Jack, Jada, Olivia, Robbie, any of you guys have a question? Since you are the host of this, you guys created this last year and have been bringing it on. It's really your show, and we want to thank you for putting this all together for everyone. We had, I think, upwards of 80 people on the stream tonight, which was great. Do any of you guys have a question? Olivia, have a question? We didn't get any young women before we let Mike go.
I guess I will ask a question.
Yeah.
Just want to say thank you again for coming here. But obviously there's a lot of relationship you would have with players and everything like that. And how do you feel, and obviously the sports industry is very big on the relationships between people, and how do you feel that has kind of helped you with your career? And how does that kind of affect your day-to-day life?
It's interesting that you bring up the relationship with the players, because you want to have a good professional relationship with them, but you also have to remain objective on the air with them. And, the part of the job that I don't particularly love is when sometimes you have to be critical. I believe there's a way to be critical without being disrespectful or harsh. The mantra I've always gone when I'm talking about a player or a coach, I would never say anything on the air to a player that I wouldn't say to his face. So even though I have to be critical sometimes, I want to do it in a respectful manner. And the thing is sometimes if you get to be too close to players or coaches, you can lose your objectivity, and then you're not serving your viewers or your listeners. My first basketball team I broadcast was Marist College, and I was pretty much the same age as some of the players, because it was shortly after I got out of college. And some of the players I became really good friends with. And I found that when I was on the air, when they were having a bad game, I was pulling punches. I was holding back, and I wasn't honest with the viewer about this particular player that night, because he was a friend of mine and I didn't want to criticize him. So it taught me that you have to be objective, and you have to be, keep a little bit of distance. Now, sometimes you can't help it. There are certain players and coaches over time that I've spent a lot of time with, and, they just become great, great friends. And it's harder to become objective, but you still have to do your job. But I think overall, if you handle yourself that way, in terms of being respectful, but also, being friendly with them, you'll gain those good relationships. It's my favorite part of the job now in the NBA. I have so many good friends of, current players, former players, current coaches, former coaches, and there's a two-way respect factor there, because they know that I'm not going to go after them, that I have to be honest. But at the same time, they respect the fact that I've always been fair in the way I've assessed them on the air and fair off the air. So it's a balance that you have to find.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Once again, Mike, we want to thank you for giving us an hour. It was a tremendous learning experience, I think, for everyone here. And for everyone who's on, just a reminder, we're going to keep doing these every week. Next week, we're going to do Wednesday, because Thursday is NFL Draft. We're going to talk the business of Major League Soccer with Mike Golub, who's the president of the Portland Timbers. And a reminder, Mike said at the beginning, he hasn't done a lot of hiring, but a lot of the people that we're going to have on these calls come from various backgrounds, and they are the ones who are going to be doing hiring. You'll learn about all different kinds of business. We've got your email addresses. We'll send out the invite to let you know who we're going to be doing every week. And also write us back. Tell us how you think we're doing, and other people that we can help find too. If you're interested in forming a club at your high school or your college that doesn't have one, let us know. We've kind of built a template for that too. But again, Mike Breen, thanks for joining us tonight for an hour. Everybody else, thanks for listening in and contributing so many questions. And hopefully you can join us again in the future.